Who's heard of Oliver Sacks? Oh, many of you, yeah. Well, for those of you who don't know, such a wonderful human being. He was a uh, English uh, neurologist, best-selling author. He lived in New York City, but best-selling author. He died in 2015. Most of Oliver's books are case histories about patients with neurological disorders, but they read like novels. Such a great writer. He wrote with great compassion and wonder and humor. He asked profound questions about identity and what it really means to be human. And some of his writings were turned into plays and even films. And one film in particular you might have seen called Awakenings is based on Oliver Sacks' experience in the early 1960s when he worked with patients in a chronic care facility in the Bronx. He treated a group of survivors of the sleeping sickness epidemic that had happened between 1916 and 1930. So they were adults at this point. Their illness was called encephalitis lethargica. Many of the victims were left in a statue-like condition, and Oliver Sacks described them as conscious and aware, yet not fully awake. So they would sit motionless and speechless all day long in their chairs, totally lacking energy or impetus or initiative or motive or appetite or affect or desire. They registered what went on about them without any active attention and with profound indifference. They neither conveyed nor felt the feeling of life. They were as insubstantial as ghosts and as passive as zombies, he wrote. And most of them had been living in that state for decades. He began treating some of these patients with a drug called levodopa, or L-DOPA, which had originally been developed to treat Parkinson's disease. And a trial run with a patient named Leonard yielded some astounding results. Leonard completely awakened from his catatonic state. For Leonard, it was like being reborn. Everything was new. He could communicate and think clearly and move freely. He regained control over his life that he had lost as a child. And that success inspired Oliver to ask for funding so that all the catatonic patients could receive this medication and experience awakenings back into reality. But they soon found that the effects of the drug were only temporary. As the first patient to awaken, Leonard was also the first to demonstrate the limited duration period of this awakening. And slowly he returned to his previous condition. And as that regression proceeded, Leonard was fully aware of what was happening to him the whole time. It was heartbreaking. But Oliver Sacks observed something remarkable. Although the initial awakening didn't last, another kind of awakening did take place in Leonard and the other patients, and it was one of learning to appreciate and to live life fully. While they were awakened, these people who had been deprived of a life that you and I so often take for granted, they wanted to experience life and revel in life completely in every single moment. They were hungry for adventure and for learning, for fun, for laughter and love. Now, if you grew up in the church, you almost certainly heard about what happened to Saul on the road to Damascus. Even if you hadn't heard the full story before, saying that someone has had a road to Damascus moment, well, that means something in our culture. But Saul, he was a ruthless persecutor of the earliest Christians. He was a bounty hunter with a passionate hatred of heretics who were saying that Jesus of Nazareth had defeated death and was the long-awaited Messiah and the Son of God. But Paul and others were asking, how could a dead man, even if he'd been raised from the dead, possibly be the Messiah and the Son of God? It was ludicrous, blasphemous. That's what the Jewish religious leaders believed, and Saul too. But it was also believed it was dangerous because in those troubled times when so many Jews felt persecuted and they were looking for God to send a Messiah, people were liable to believe anything. And the appalling thing to Saul was folks were taking this Jesus' story seriously. The Jewish religious authorities had enough stuff to worry about, what with the Romans occupying their country, taxing people to death, and with roving gangs of revolutionaries and hoodlums running around creating havoc. Now these followers of Jesus were multiplying like rabbits, teaching and preaching and converting people to their silly beliefs and claiming that their cause was an awakening to God's true plan for humanity. So Saul, schooled in the old-time religion and a professional hater of anything unorthodox and new, he made it his personal mission in life to arrest and harass any Christian he could lay his hands on. His job was to root these people out, haul them back to Jerusalem for trial, and help facilitate their sentencing. It served them right to be treated harshly, and it provided a deterrent for other malcontents. But one day, his sources told him of a secret Christian underground cell operating out of Damascus, just a few days' walk to the north. So he set out with a couple of his trusty henchmen. But then, on the approach to Damascus, a bright light, a voice from out of nowhere, and then blindness. So he's carried into the city, deposited at a mysterious house, and taken in by one of the very men that he's come there to arrest. When Saul comes to his senses, when he has an experience like scales falling from his eyes, he sees everything as if for the first time. The sky is still the sky, but he's never seen it that way before. The wind is still the wind, but it feels different. And the strangest thing of all, his belief in God is just as strong as ever, but now his heart has been opened wider than ever, with a love he never knew before. It's a love that tells him God's welcoming embrace is not restricted to only certain people who practice their faith in a certain way and who follow all manner of rules and regulations that define their identity and belonging. No. God's love, he realizes, extends to everyone. And his transformation is so profound, his awakening is so complete, that his very name must change from Saul, which is a specifically Jewish name, to a universal Latin or Roman name, Paul. A name that's not bound up in any one part of the world or restrained to any one religion. Now, if that's all we know about Paul, it'd still be a really good story. It's powerful because it's practically mythical. That motif is used in novels and movies all the time. It's the story of the redeemed villain. A bad person is transformed into a good person. An antagonist becomes the hero, oddly enough. A story of awakening. But of course, Paul's story doesn't end there. He travels throughout the Western world as it was at the time. He preaches, he writes. Not a stretch to claim that Paul is the reason we're here today. He's that important. He is the engine that pushes the story of Christianity out beyond the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. If Jesus is the main character on the stage, showing us in his life what it means to live and love and be fully human, then Paul is the one who built the theater, who promoted the production, and who grabbed people off the street, come inside and watch and listen to this show. We just take it for granted today, but Paul is one of the key people who developed the concept that Judaism and faith in Jesus flow in an unbroken line. That's why in a Christian church, we study and we revere particularly Jewish stories about people like Abraham and Moses. Paul is why Christians even read the Old Testament. And he wrote a large part of what makes up the New Testament. Amazing guy. A couple of things I think that are very interesting about that. First of all, is that we don't call ourselves the Church of Paul. We're a Christian church. Our denomination is the United Church of who? Christ, not Paul. Which means, as important as Paul was, he was not pointing to himself. And everything he did, he pointed to Jesus Christ. But, if Paul was that good at what he did, and he clearly was, he could have easily started a cult or a belief system that would have benefited himself. But he didn't do that. Now, there are many people, and I'm one of them, who've criticized Paul for his theology or his position on one thing or another. by our modern standards and understandings of human nature and relationships, Paul's insistent attitudes they can sometimes rub us the wrong way. They can come across as backward and tiresome. He can sound a lot like a street corner Bible thumping fire and brimstone kind of evangelist. And that's not exactly our style. So we often find fault with Paul. His writing can make us squirm. But you know what? It's okay to do that. It's okay to point out things in the Bible that we disagree with. But even if we're not big fans of every idea that Paul ever had, we also need to admit that if it were not for Paul, we wouldn't be having this conversation about Christianity in the first place. Or at least it'd be very, very different. Because every word Paul wrote or spoke was what he believed at the time, pointed to God's love as it is made real in Jesus. We still believe most of that. Paul understood that he was not the message, he was just a vessel, he was an instrument. By his own admission, he was not a flawless instrument. He acknowledged his own limitations and his blind spots. But by and large, he really didn't talk about himself that much. He was constantly saying, hey, look over here. Look at this. Experience what I have experienced, an awakening. And you can too. And that's the other thing that's interesting to me. Once we're awakened, then life is not so much about us anymore. I think that's how you can tell if someone's been awakened. You ever known anyone where everything is always about them? They're not awake. A catatonic state of focusing on themselves. They're in their own little world. Like they're suffering from a sleeping sickness almost. But we can also recognize those who are awake. They are always the givers. They're the people who sail out beyond the shore of what's comfortable and what's familiar, who see the sky and feel the wind as if for the first time, and who believe in love without limits. They're the dreamers. The same sky and the same wind surround both of those who sleepwalk and those who are awake. The same trials and tribulations, the same hardships, the same joys, and the same realities of life confront and confound both types of people. To those who are awake, those with eyes that see and ears that hear and arms that reach out and self-giving love, those are the people who navigate life not by saying, what's in it for me, but what can I do for you? They don't say, oh, but my load is so heavy. They say, can I help you carry your load? And when we're hurting and afraid, they don't say, well, let me tell you about the time that happened to me. No. Those who are awake say, tell me how I can help you. Take my hand and I'll be with you. Together we'll find a way. You know, we're created and we're called not to sleepwalk through life, but to be awake, to appreciate and to live life by giving ourselves away in love, to point the way to God's love by being infants of that love. It has no limits.